This episode guest moved to the States as an international student to attend CalArts. While there, he was Sony animation intern and Pixar animation intern. In his senior year, he created Dodoba, an impressive 6-minute short film that also earned him a nomination as Best Student Film at the Annie Awards. After graduation, he worked as story artist at Blue Sky for several years, and he's currently working at Pixar. Welcome to my guest of the day, Yon Lee.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Thank you, Camilla.
For everyone who's watching, if you like this kind of interview, just subscribe to the channel so you can be up to date with new interviews and videos. It also helps grow the channel, of course. And well, let's just dig into, I guess. So Yon, you are originally from Malaysia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you moved to the States just for CalArts, like when you started CalArts, right? That was your first time. I was wondering what sparked your interest in animation when you were back home, and what were the main obstacles between your time there and finally getting to the States to study at CalArts?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in animation since I was a kid. I just didn't really know how to get there. I always thought that, oh, maybe someday if I could make it into the world of the arts or whatever, I could maybe earn a living as a painter. I didn't know that there was a whole industry out there that I could be a part of to make a living. And much later in high school, I had learned about this local art college that taught animation, and that really was the beginning of it all. I went to the college after high school, graduated, and then I got offered a job at Rhythm and Hues working in the visual effects department. And it was really fun. It was amazing. I had an amazing time working with the people and the team. And while I just remembered feeling really curious about, the people behind these cameras, because I was in the visual effects department, right? I was a match mover. And I was working on match moving for all of these live action plays that were given to us in post-production. And I've always just been curious, like, who are the people behind these cameras? Who are the people behind the scene, who wrote the film and actually dictated, the story, the camera, the actors, and everything, yada, yada, yada. And that was when I realized that, oh, I think I'm really much more interested in the making of these films than in the post-production side of it. That was when I started realizing, how can I be a part of that? How can I do that? And I've always loved reading books, but I've very rarely read autobiographical books or nonfiction. And I think it might have been this book called, shoot, I'm blanking out on the title of the book. But anyway, CalArts was actually mentioned in one of these books. And that was when I started realizing, wait, this school still exists. And that was when I started doing the research. And
How old were you then?
I was 21 at the time. I was 21. 21 going on 22, I think.
Okay.
So to me, it really did feel like, oh, should I still go back to school? Because looking back at it, probably was a little stupid that I felt old, because I really wasn't. But then there was this fear where I'm like, I'm getting a little older and I'm not sure if I would want to go back to college again. But I think really the biggest obstacle was, how can I actually get over to America, right? Like, will I even get a visa? And then the other obstacle was when I looked up the history of students at CalArts, I don't think there was another Malaysian in the past that had actually made it out there. And I felt like, well, what are the chances of me getting in there then if there wasn't anybody who looked like me, who, was part of the program? And that was really scary because I didn't see the possibility of me getting in there.
And how did that change?
I just, I don't know, like I just felt like but I should just go for it anyway. It was really scary, but I just, I was like, maybe I could be the first. I don't know. But I think I just wanted it so badly that I didn't want to give myself another option. Like it literally felt like I had one shot to do it. That if I didn't go for it, then this chance might never open up again. Because thankfully I have a really supportive family who felt that I should, give it a go. Like there really isn't a lot to lose. And I'm very fortunate in that sense because I know that kind of support can be difficult to come by for a lot of family. So family support was definitely super helpful.
And up to that point, have you always been drawing?
Yeah, I would say that I've been drawing a lot since I was a kid. And then when I went to my local art college, just want to give a shout out to that college. It's called the One Academy if you're in Malaysia. That's where I went to school. And I drew a lot, but I think I had also transitioned into more of a computer animation phase where I started working more in CG modeling, and rigging, lighting, etc. That really was the reason why I landed a job in visual effects at first because I felt a lot more capable in handling anything that was CG related versus drawing related. So I pretty much had to unlearn, well, not unlearn, relearn how to draw properly. I, had to go back to the basics of understanding how gesture drawing works because I was pretty bad at that as well. I didn't really know how to figure draw. I was really terrible at anatomy, and I think I still have a lot to learn even today.
We all have all the
Yeah.
time. But so you tried to get into CalArts. Did you get in at the first with the first attempt?
I did, yeah. I was super lucky.
And so how was trying to get in, like prepare? Because I know like when I applied that time, they have all our requirement for sketchbooks. So were you used to like draw in a sketchbook, or did you have to pick up that habit?
When I figured out that, I'm gonna go to CalArts and I needed to, fill up an entire sketchbook to be sent as part of the portfolio requirement, that was a little difficult to get into because I had already been working full time. I had a 9 to 5 job, and it was really exhausting to just find little pockets of time to just fill in my little sketchbook. So I would have a sketchbook with me everywhere I go. When like on my way to work, I took the public transport, the public bus to work at the time, and I spent a lot of time drawing on the bus, on my way to work, on my way back home, and then when I got home, I spent the rest of the night just drawing in my sketchbook and working on other portfolio pieces. So that was definitely hard because I felt like I had 2 jobs going on at the same time. My 9 to 5 job and then just working on my portfolio from, like 8 to 12 a.m. or sometimes 8 to 1 a.m. And then I get up again at like 6:30 a.m. to go to work. And I kept that on for about 6 to 7 months. That was how long I was working on my portfolio for, and then eventually sent it up. But yeah, it was hard.
And then so like you get accepted, and I guess you went through all the paperwork to get the visa. Was that a stressful time, or was that pretty straightforward for you?
I think for me, the most stressful period was probably the making of the portfolio, because I just felt like because there were no other Malaysians that had been accepted to the program prior to me, I just felt like I didn't have a framework to look at. I just felt like a lot of the things that I do, that I was doing at the time may be wrong, or, like I didn't feel like there was a guidebook for me to look at. And the only really other helpful thing that I remembered having at the time was there was this forum called Animated Buzz that existed at the time. And yeah, yes, oh, you're familiar with that probably.
Yeah.
And that forum was originally started by a graduate from CalArts who documented his entire 4 years while he went to CalArts. And so for people who aren't aware of that forum today, I don't know if it still exists today. Back in our time, that was where a lot of CalArts applicants actually went on and asked for advice, right? Like we would upload our drawings and our gesture drawings and our sketchbooks, and we would ask for advice, like, hey, what do you all think? And people would actually also, accepted students they would also actually post their portfolios to show people who were interested. And they would say, hey, I got accepted into CalArts and this is my portfolio. So we would all just look at that and go, oh, this is amazing. Maybe we could actually do something like that. And that was really my frame of reference in getting into CalArts at the time. And I thought it was super helpful to just, have a forum, like a community to help support you.
And well, I guess like CalArts is pretty small, right? They have like usually 25 students per year.
I think the average, I don't know what the average is right now, but during my year, I think we started off at about maybe 42 students in my year. And in the following year, I think they had a little bit less than that.
And so like, for example, when I moved to Canada for Sheridan, I find like my main obstacle in the first year was the language, especially because like suddenly you are in an environment where everybody speaks English, your friends speaks English, you study in English, you read in English, you start thinking in English. And then the other thing was homesickness in the first year. Like during stressful period, I wish I had like old friends or people I knew. Was that something you had to face? How was your first year, and how was to adapting to the States?
It was definitely tricky. I had already spoken English in Malaysia growing up before coming to America, but it was different, right? Like if you're like coming to America, my first couple of months, it was difficult for a lot of people to understand my accent because as much as I did growing up speaking English back at home, we had our own accent. It's called the Malaysian English accent, or Manglish. That's the English that I spoke growing up, right? A combination of Mandarin and English. That definitely wasn't useful when I moved out here, and I, had to do a lot of work. I remember I was in a music class, and it was my turn to sing, and halfway through, a teacher actually stopped me and pulled me aside and said, hey, I think it would be good for you to maybe just work on your pronunciation now and not just sing it, but really just like clear enunciation. And that really was, the moment where I'm like, oh, I think I have to like change. I think I have to like fit in. And she definitely wasn't mean or anything. She was really nice, and I think she really just wanted to help. I don't know, me be a better speaker, I guess, but that made me super self-conscious. And for a while, I was actually afraid to talk because I was afraid of being embarrassed. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting was I grew up with a lot of animated films that I think a lot of uh, that a lot of my American classmates grew up with too. But there were also a lot of films and movies that I didn't grow up with. Magic School Bus was one of them. Doug, I think, was one of them. And I also didn't understand a lot of the 70s and 80s references from American sitcoms or movies or like pop cultural references from that era. So it definitely was a little tricky, but I just sort of accepted that as part of the experience for being an immigrant or an international student.
Well, I guess also like, on the long run, it's kind of an advantage in the work environment too, though. Like the fact that you have also different, like from one side it is problematic maybe if so a script has a reference to something you don't know, but of course you can always look it up. But I guess it makes you even more. It makes you think different, thanks to all the things you watch that other people didn't.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, like definitely hold on to those part of you. Like don't let it go because they're so precious.
But even if maybe at the beginning, yeah, it's a bit traumatic maybe. No,
Yeah.
not traumatic, but complicated.
Mhm.
Um, so like looking back, do you think you could have made that transition smoother if someone gave you some advice? Like, do you have something you would tell to someone who's like foreign, moving to the States or North America? Is there something they can do to help themselves get out of the transition?
I think at the time, my first year, I was completely overwhelmed by how much I was learning about the States and the kind of film language that people use. Right. And I grew up with a lot of uh, Chinese films and like Japanese anime and a lot of Asian films in general. Um, so I remember at the time just thinking, oh, like all of these things that I'm unaware about, like all these people are telling me about all these film references, like it's my time to explore what I don't know. That really was more my headspace at the time. It was just like, oh, I don't know what they're talking about, so I'm just going to listen. But I think now the more I think about it, I wish I had also shared the films that I love. You know, I don't think I felt like I was more on the receiving end of things when I went to school at CalArts, where I was mostly absorbing what people were throwing at me, and I was super thankful. But I feel like I wish I could have also given back to the community. Like I wish I would have been able to share the films that I loved growing up. And I think even for um, like anime, I don't think that was super widely talked about until maybe my second year at CalArts when things started to feel, there used to be, I think, just like, I don't know, prejudice against people who love anime way in the past, I think. And
Yeah,
I think
there's still a bit in schools, especially I remember like Sheridan, they have a requirement that you don't draw anything anime related in your portfolio or something. I don't know if they changed that, but like until like a few years ago,
yeah, yeah. So it's different now.
I'm not sure if they changed that. I'm pretty like I think there's still like a bit of that, and I think it's related to the fact that like until recently the industry in North America didn't really integrate that kind of style. So like for the school was kind of trying to tell the student, don't put that because you're not gonna find work if you draw that kind of stuff, because it's not the style they're looking for maybe.
Yeah. Well,
Probably it's changing now that the taste in North American animation is changing. That will change too.
yeah.
But
The
go ahead. Sorry.
Totally agree. Well, I mean, I was going to ask you because you were also an international student,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So the struggle that I had at the time was I didn't know what the status quo was for most of the time. I was new in America and I didn't know the types of films that people were talking about. Um, and for me, I was so afraid of just being disrupted the entire time, which is the reason why I was so quiet and mostly just listened and absorb because I was so afraid of putting things out there that might disrupt the status quo. And because I didn't know what the status quo was, I was so afraid of breaking it. Did you have the same experience?
Yeah, well, first of all, like I tend to be kind of shy in new situations, so that's one. I remember like someone told me that I was intimidating because I was very quiet and big and older. So I was just like, I didn't know if I would fit in. And the other thing I remember is also that I don't think it was just like a cultural thing. It was also an age thing, because I came to Sheridan that I was already 24, 25, and most of my classmates were like 18. Some people even 17. So there was also a slight generational gap other than cultural. And I remember once I got accepted, they created a Facebook page for the whole class of 2000 graduating in 2017, and we are like 150 students every year, so it's a lot of people. And all these people were talking about like Airbender, Korra
Mhm.
Airbender, and I didn't know what it was. And I remember I binge watched the whole first season before going to Sheridan, just to be able to. So I was like, maybe this is the thing that everybody's watching now, and I didn't watch it because I wasn't into animation that much for a long time. Like I wanted to be in animation when I was a kid, but then growing up I was playing basketball and doing other stuff, so I wasn't drawing at all. So I wasn't paying attention. Then I started drawing. I got into Sheridan, and everybody was talking about this, and I was like, okay, I have to watch it, because otherwise I'm not gonna fit in. Like if everybody's talking about this and I don't know anything about it, then it's gonna be weird. So I remember that, uh, but I keep thinking it was also a age thing, because I was a bit older. Also, like Italy, where I come from, if someone's watching the video doesn't know, had a lot of Japanese animation from the 80s. Like in the 90s, when I was growing up, there was a lot of 80s Japanese animation, a lot of sport anime, and that those were all things that nobody watched in North America, except like Dragon Ball, maybe.
Yeah.
But all the other stuff I grew up with, nobody knew anything about it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah. But going back to your experience at CalArts, you also made like made Dodoba, your senior thesis film.
Mhm.
Um, I guess that was the last personal project, like big personal project you made. Is that
Yeah.
correct? So
Mhm.
like, how do you? Because this is a question I always wonder about. How what do you feel is the main difference between making like a personal story like that, like telling the storytelling you use in a personal project, and the storytelling you have to bring on a studio project? Do you feel like there's any difference?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the biggest difference is really just switching my mindset to from this is a project that I'm working on for myself, and to the mindset that is I'm assisting a director who wants to tell the story, and this is his story. How can I help him? So it's really just turning the gaze away from the personal to um, someone else's personal story versus my personal story. And with my student film, it was different in a way where I felt like a lot of the choices that were made were based on personal preferences, right? Like the kinds of story, the tone, character design, the animation, the length, the music, and everything comes from a personal choice, a personal taste. Versus working at a studio, it really the tricky thing is really looking for the fine line uh, between like what is your personal preferences versus your director's personal preferences, and how can you assist your director in making the film that he wants by still drawing from your personal experiences. That has been the hardest thing so far, and I've been better at it, but with every director it's different, and I think with every director understanding how they work and understanding their personal preferences and their taste and their love for films, I think that is part of the job in itself. Um, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. But so like also going back to what you said, like you wished you shared more of your personal culture experience in film you love that maybe your CalArts peers didn't watch because they grew up in the US. Do you feel you do that now on your job? Do you bring your culture, your experiences on your job?
Definitely. I feel like I'm a lot. more inclined to do that now because, and I feel like that is reflective of the time too, right? I feel like a lot of people now, audiences now are, they just want new stuff, right? Like they want, like I feel like audiences they want to get challenged. They want to be challenged. They want to see things that are different. And I feel like a lot of people in the animation industry too, there is an itch for just wanting to push the boundaries to you know, like push the envelope and break out of the box a little bit. And I think that is just reflective, that is super reflective of the current situation that we're in, where a lot of artists they just want to challenge the studios to tell different kinds of stories, and especially if you're, you know, a person of color, a minority, an immigrant. Um, there's so much that I feel like you can bring to the table, right? That I feel like sometimes um, I feel like this is a really good time for studios to actually start listening and to be exposed to different voices. Um, and I feel like there is no better time than now to for artists who are you know, marginalized, minority, um, to share and to keep pushing for things that you feel like would challenge um, the status quo, right? Like creative positions that you've seen like thousands of times in animated films. Like, what are the cliches? How can you break them? How can you reinvent the narrative from a different vantage point that can only be understood and seen through the eyes of someone who isn't an American, for example? Um, and I feel like increasingly, more than ever, I see a lot of younger artists who are starting to push the envelope. And it's just so inspiring to see that even studios now are asking to be challenged, right? Like this isn't just coming from the
But
artists themselves.
do you feel so that you feel like this is like a time where this kind of storytelling can be embraced by big studios and not just be an independent project? Is that what you
I'm really hoping for that. I think Netflix is a really great example of how I don't work for Netflix, right? But the
Yeah.
appeal of Netflix to me is that it caters to such a wide demographic, and I think um, that to me feels amazing because I think when your demographic is a lot smaller, the choices that you make are pretty limited, I would say. And I think just looking at the films that Netflix has been pushing out for, you know, the past couple of years, I think the amount of diversity that I'm seeing from Netflix, not in terms of just, you know, getting films and TV shows from people of color, but also just the kinds of like tone and structures of story. There's just so much variety to it, and I'm seeing this itch from a lot of artists and even directors at big studios who want to push themselves to be bolder and to make bigger steps, right? Bigger leaps. So I
Well,
always look at, you know, big streaming services like Netflix. Like if you have a wide enough demographic to appeal to sell your movie to, like what are the kinds of stories that you can tell? Because I feel like the larger your demographic is, the more varied your demographic is, the more reflective of the current world that we live.
well, the big advantage that Netflix has, I think, is the fact that they are a platform and not a studio. So like a lot of the project they're producing, they're supporting small studios. So like it's not all Netflix production, but actually they are helping other studios. For example, like even Klaus, right,
Yeah,
was not a Netflix production per se. It was like Netflix acquiring and helping producing a Spanish studio story, right? And they do that a lot, and that's really great for them, right?
totally.
Compared to more classic animation studios that maybe they have a style and they can't they have, and I it's understandable from their point of view. It's a business point of view. They have to kind of cater for that style, but Netflix is a platform, so they can literally do anything because they're going to just put it in the platform, and some people are going to watch it, some people are not, but they can take that kind of risk.
Yeah,
That's probably one of the big advantages they have right now.
Yeah, for sure.
And going back to your work, and talking a bit of a technical side of storyboarding, I was wondering, can you talk about a bit of your process storyboarding? For example, like do you thumbnails on scripts before the meeting with the director or head of story, or do you write down stuff? What's your process?
Yeah. Well, the most ideal situation for me, whenever I get kicked off on a sequence, is to always hope that I will be given the script prior to the kickoff slash meeting. And I think it's always just so important that if you're being blessed with, the script, like hours or even a day before the meeting, then I think you're already ahead of the game, because you get to sit down with the script and you get to study it and you get to formulate questions and analyze it before you sit down with your director and before he gives you the kickoff. And I think that's just super important, because one of the mistakes that I made when I first started in the industry was, whenever I got the script, I would just read it and I would never have any questions, because I just assumed like, oh, the director's going to give me like
all the answers,
details and the answers, and all I have to do is just do whatever he says. And that certainly was what I struggled with when I first graduated, because I felt like I had went from making my own films at school to working on someone else's film. And again, like, I didn't know what the status quo was. I didn't really know what the norm was. I felt like it was my time to just sit back and shut up and just let someone else do the talking, because I was so afraid of disrupting the structure. And obviously that was wrong. So now I think I'm a lot better, where I would much prefer to have the schedule before the kickoff. And that doesn't always happen, because realistically, production is always going to be, a little all over the place, and you kind of just have to learn to work with whatever is being thrown at you. But again, like, I have been blessed many times with where I have been given scripts way before the kickoff, and I love just sitting down with the script and just be able to look at it and like look at it from my own personal perspective, and get to have a conversation with the script before I start talking to my director. I think, having that little space is my chance to just be in this little world before the director comes in. And even if it's their film, I think it's important for me to know where my voice comes in, so I get to have a conversation with my director.
Also because like sometime maybe you can bring something to the table that they just didn't consider, right? Like it's not just about like they have their own ideas, but it's not because it's always the best idea. Sometimes it's just because they didn't consider this other thing that you bring to the table, and maybe they like it better.
Absolutely, yeah. The best directors that I've worked with so far have been directors who are super open to, like, questions, who actually encourage their artists to challenge them with questions. I've worked with directors who are really great, where I'll bring up questions like, oh, do you feel like this makes sense for this character to be doing this in this scene, because this kind of breaks their arc a little bit? And they go, oh, I think you're right. Like, what can we do to fix this? And I think that's always a good conversation to have with your director, is to just come in rife with questions if you have any, and don't be afraid to ask, because that can only be helpful in the long run. I found that to not ask any questions at all and to just, run with it, a lot of times these questions actually come back in the future from different artists, and I think, but my job as a story artist is to not just draw what's on the script, but to also, like,
interpret
and think about what I don't see on the script, and question why the script was written the way it is, and how can I help further the narrative. And
Also, because even if the screenwriter is really good, it's always like a different medium from a visual medium. So like sometimes maybe they write something that you can express in a different way. You don't always have to show what the script says, right? Like sometimes it's just like, so you have to interpret what the purpose was in the story sometimes. And also, like, I guess I see that with TV, like when you are in a situation where you're just like doing whatever they tell you and you don't have the room to interpret or to bring something of yours to the job, that's usually when you just become you just execute the vision of someone else, and you just don't feel part of it. And I feel like the best directors have been those that makes you feel part of the process, right?
yeah.
At least for me. What do you think? Talking about directors, what's the, the most important attributes that a good director should have? Like if you are going to be a director one day, what are the things that you learn that you wish you were able to incorporate in your role as a director, for example?
I think my favorite directors that I've worked with so far have always been people who are able to understand where their decisions are coming from. I think I understand that it may be difficult for directors sometimes to have all the answers. And I think sometimes it is just not realistic for anyone to be making a film and to have, all the answers right off the bat, right? I think,
Also because there's so much going on, like they're supervising story, animation, design, so they have so many meetings that is also.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're always like, what I bring to them sometimes, a question or whatever, that comes from just me being a story artist. But they're always dealing with several things, right? So one question that I have might actually disrupt them because it interferes with a lot of other things that they're currently thinking about as well. But then I think for me, again, like going back to that, my favorite directors have always been like people who are able to make creative decisions, knowing where they're coming from. I think it is a little tricky sometimes because, with films, I think sometimes you do have to take a leap of faith and say, I don't really have all the answer, but this is where my team comes in and we can have a conversation. Um, and I love working with directors who have been able to open themselves up to have a conversation with their team when they don't have answers, right? I think to be vulnerable and to just be able to sometimes say, well, hey, I don't have all the answers, but here's what I can give you. Like, could you, like, can I get some help? And then the team jumps in. And I think, being able to just be part of collaboration sometimes makes the team feel um,
More part of it.
yeah, like it's definitely more of like a teamwork thing. And I also love directors who have really strong visions, but they also give a little bit of leeway to the artist to figure out how to get there. The most fun directors I've worked with they often have a very clear direction of where they want to go. They just don't know how to get there, so they'll come up with some kind of scenario like, oh, like in this scene, I really want this character to go from here to here, but I don't know how to get there. And really, the arc of the character is already there. And really, it's just a matter of how the character gets there. Like sometimes it can be done through, like, did you make it really entertaining or like make it really comedic or yada yada yada. And that's where the story artist can come in and fulfill that part. Um, and yeah, but I would always definitely stress, I think being able to make creative decisions, knowing where they're coming from is super, super helpful for me as an artist. So I don't always have to guess where you're coming from. Because I would also say that that can be a struggle for story artists when you don't know where the director's intention lies, because then we're just going to be playing the guessing game. And yes, that sometimes can be helpful, but in the long run, I think that is very exhausting, and that can, like, you can get burned out from just always just, I don't know, trying to figure out what the director is trying to go after. And your job is definitely to help the director arrive at his destination, right? But I think if your director doesn't know where he's going, then I think that can be really tricky.
In my experience, like also like the other thing, like one of the best director I had on TV, for example, was a director that she was always able to filter the stress that was coming from above. You know, like sometimes you have tight light, especially in TV, but I guess the same is in feature. Like I had some directors that they were stressed by what is happening above them, and they would transmit the stress to the team below them, kind of thing. But
Um,
like, so I always thought that if I was gonna be a director, one thing I wanted to keep in mind, for example, is to be able to be positive. Like even if something is stressful above me, that's not a problem for the animator or for the story. It's my problem and I want to be able to filter that. I don't
yeah,
know if you ever experienced that, but there's some directors that are always really positive, and you're like, there's so much going on in their life and all these meetings, and they're still like bringing a lot of energy to the meetings. So those one are my favorites, honestly.
I agree. I really appreciate directors like that. I've been fortunate to work with a director who is exactly like that, where, sometimes, there can be moments of stress, but then you don't see it in his eyes because he's so calm. And it really helps us as story artists, people working with him to know that, like film production isn't always going to be easy. And there will be moments where things get hard. But I think, strong leadership also comes from people who know, like what you say, like who know how to filter that out so we can all work um, with ease and not have that added baggage that the director carries, right? Because you don't always want your artist to be carrying the baggage for you. And I think knowing how to, filter that out is super helpful for artists.
Yeah. Going back to your to the way you work with storyboarding, um, do you ever get stuck on a sequence? And if so, how did you overcome that? Maybe like you don't have a clear solution for a certain part of your sequence, and what do you do in those cases?
Yeah, whenever I get stuck, I try. Um, I've tried the classic, like, walk away from your desk and just not think about it, right? And sometimes that works, and sometimes that doesn't work. Um, and I found that the thing that has always been super helpful for me is to, whenever I'm stuck, like I'll definitely walk away from the desk. I'll go on a walk, and then sometimes I'll just read books, like books that doesn't have anything to do with the subject matter at all. Like random books, like books that I've been putting off for a while. Sometimes they may be self-help books. Sometimes may be fiction, comic book, or whatever. I find that the spirit in doing that is not so much um, researching and through other materials, but it's a lot more about relaxing your brain so that it allows for so that it takes away how defensive your mind can be when you're trying to problem solve an issue. I find that every time when I sit at uh, the computer and when I try to break down things from the script and understand a certain puzzle that I'm trying to figure out, I get super tense, and I feel like my brain goes into like defense mode, and like walls just come up. And I think when that wall comes up, it's hard for any ideas from outside to actually infiltrate and come in for me to look at things differently. So I find that walking away or like reading books or like being distracted from by doing other things, it's not so much like me doing research, but more relaxing myself so the walls can come down. And when they finally come down, like always, almost without a doubt, like new ideas always come in because my brain is finally relaxing. And this always happens too whenever I'm showering or whenever I'm doing something that's super relaxing, like taking my trash out or doing my dishes. Like anytime I'm not super tensed about like problem solving anything, like the walls always come down. And I think you may be surprised too by how sometimes you already have the answers. They're percolating in the back of your head and you just don't know it. And that answer is just waiting for you to just bring down those walls so they can come in. And I find that the easiest way for me to do that is just do something that is completely mindless, like cleaning my house, doing the dishes, laundry, for example.
Did you ever get stuck close to a deadline?
Yeah.
And what happens then? You can't walk away in that case.
No, you can't walk away. Whenever that happens, um, I would say that I rarely let myself get to that point close to a deadline because
It's not a nice place to be.
it's not a nice place to be. And I've had that happen to me a lot of times when I first started in the industry. And that is not fun because, like so much unnecessary stress and it can't be good for you in the long run. And I want to live a long time. So a couple incidents that I can think of when that has happened is well, with storyboarding, in most cases, when I show my stuff to my director, there's usually the thumbnail phase, right? And then the cleanup phase. So a lot of the times when I get stuck, it usually happens during the thumbnail phase. And I would say that that's actually a really good place to be stuck at because when you're in a thumbnail phase, I feel like things are always still shifting and not everybody has the answer or anything. So a lot of the times where I've gotten stuck during thumbnail phases, I would just, throw in like an empty page that says, still trying to figure this out, still trying to figure that out, and then I'll have other parts fleshed out. The thing that I find useful is whenever I work with my director or whenever I get kicked up on a script, I'll usually try to just get an idea of what is the most important part of the scene that you want me to focus on. Because it's almost unrealistic to give every page equal weight, right? I think while every page and every scene and every little moment is important, I think these little moments are building up to a bigger moment, like a bigger payoff. So whenever I get kicked off on a sequence, that's just what I go after, right? Like I would ask my director, like, what is the biggest thing that you want me to focus on in the script? Like, what is the biggest turn in the character? Like, what is the point of the scene? And once I figure that out, I start working backwards from there. Like, I know if this character is going to have a change of value in the scene, then I'm going to try to figure out how I can build up to that. And I think as long as I have the mechanics that lead up to that, then I know I'm okay. And sometimes the moments that I actually get stuck on are the moments that are smaller because I know that those aren't the most important. So I'll try to, go for the big fish first. Like, what is the hardest thing for me to problem solve in the scene? And I'm going to start with that. So if I can get the most important thing out of the way and other things that are smaller that probably won't matter as much aren't that figured out, I think I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay with just telling my director. So I figured out the most important thing that you want me to figure out. These other parts aren't that figured out, but they're not super important, right? They're just, at most like fillers.
Yeah.
So I would say being able to have that distinction right from the get-go is super important, because being able to prioritize, I can't stress that enough, is that will save your life. That will save you from like burnout. Just not being able to not put an equal weight across like all 5 pages would be so helpful, because then you can really just focus on the thing that really matters, and all the other stuff that doesn't get figured out right off the bat, like that's okay in my opinion. I think there's always time for those little moments to, for them to come in much later in the picture.
And so like all these kind of process, do you feel is the same in all the different, like you work both, well I guess you intern at Sony too, but then you work at Blue Sky and now at Pixar. Do you feel there is a difference in the way these studios works, or do you feel they have they have the same dynamic in your experience?
Yeah, I think for me, I was only an intern at Sony, so I didn't really
For how long? 4 months?
for about 2 months.
2 months?
Yeah, I spent a summer at Sony during my um, sophomore year,
Yeah.
the summer of my sophomore year, and so I can't really speak to that part of it, because my perspective, the lens in which I viewed the
Yeah.
studio from an entrance perspective, very limited. Um, but I would say the biggest difference, I guess, that I've noticed between working at Blue Sky or working at Pixar is, I think the directors that I've worked with at Blue Sky, I remember just there being more iteration. Uh, and the storyboard pitches, like I'll run through like sometimes at most 6 to 7 passes of storyboarding before it gets sent to edit. And I remember feeling so happy when my scene got sent into edit for the first time, and this was on Ferdinand.
Mhm.
And I think I had worked on that scene for about maybe 6 or 7 times, and pitched it 6 or 7 times. And when it finally got sent into edit, I was like, "Oh, this is really great! Like I finally did it," and it felt like a big achievement. And it was really great.
Like six iteration of the same sequence. How long does
Yeah,
that usually take for you? Like how
so
long was that experience with that?
almost 6 or 7 passes, and I think I had worked on that scene for about maybe um, almost 2 months, I think.
Okay.
And on and off too, because sometimes when you're working on um, a scene, like things get paused a little bit, and then you get assigned to a different sequence.
So it's pretty much like a pass every week, almost.
Yeah, sometimes 2 passes a week.
Okay.
And then at Pixar, I would say I've worked with directors who love seeing things get sent into edit as soon as possible, um, because a lot of directors who I've worked with at Pixar so far seem to like seeing the movie
Already edited.
with yeah, already edited, but from just like a bigger context of being able to see like, oh, this is how things play and to act two, and I guess this is where the payoff is. And it's a lot harder sometimes when you're spending so much time and working on all these different passes in storyboarding and not seeing how that will change and edit.
I remember when I was like training there at Blue Sky, they were showing like an act one of what then became Spies in Disguise.
Yeah.
Does Pixar have the same thing? Do they screen acts, or do they always wait to screen the whole thing? How is there
My experience so far, and I think it's also different
from director to director?
with the director. The directors that I've been working with at Pixar so far have mostly loved just getting storyboards into um, the editorial phase ASAP. because they love seeing films and cutting, and I think it's easier for them to tell how things are playing out. I would say that most instances, a lot of the screenings that I've been to definitely have a more complete Act 1, 2, and 3 screening. And sometimes, occasionally, you'll see, like, this time we'll only do Act 1, or this time we'll only do, this without this. And a lot of times, those usually happen because um, the studio is trying to get a gauge of, like, how can we tackle all these issues just in this specific act, and versus really just not having the answer to everything. So I would say that I think it's different from director to director, and I think it's a little difficult to speak specifically from just the perspective of working at
Yeah.
Pixar or Blue Sky, because I think the one thing that is interesting about the animation industry too is people jump from one studio to the other, and I think a lot of artists have their own ways of adopting.
So you feel like the production depends more on the people that work on that production rather than the studio itself?
Yeah, though I would say that sometimes certain studios will have a more like defined approach as to how they would love to run things.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely plays a big role as well as to how people approach their screenings.
I guess we skipped one thing, and I guess it's something everybody who's not in the industry would like to know. How did you end up working at Blue Sky, or how you ended up Pixar as well? Like, did they reach out? Did you apply? How did that work?